In this lesson, we are going to look at how to add settings sections via the Settings API in WordPress. So what we're going to come do is activate our settings section plugin, come into our plugin page, and we should see a settings section. So the settings section that we're going to have has a title, and then it has an optional description as well, which we will look at how to set up. So coming into our code, our plugin basic file should look pretty similar to before. We have some paths set up, and then we have our menus, and we also have a new file, settings fields. So whereas we had the options directly hard-coded before, now we're setting up a settings fields. So we could come into that file, and what we see is that we're hooking into admin init with our plugin settings function, and we're calling a single function add settings section. Now, it's important to point out here that at this point, we're not saving anything to the options table. We're not creating fields yet. We're just creating that settings section. Now, we don't have to create one from scratch. Like I mentioned, I will show you after we set all this up manually how to hook into other pages and other sections. But commonly, when you're building your own plugin, you're going to have to add your own sections. Now, even if you only have one section, you still have to add at least that one. However, if your data can be broken up into several pages or into several form fields, into several field groups, then you want to go ahead and set up a different section for each one of those. So in our example, we're setting up one, and you need to set up at least one, but it's also possible to just duplicate this code and change a few things around to have multiple sections, and that's hopefully something you'll play with. So let's go ahead and break this down. Again, first of all, we are inside of admin init, and then we're calling this section WP plugin settings section, and I would suggest namespacing it so that you have something specific to your plugin at the beginning, and then something telling you that it's a section or being specific about what it is. Then we're going to give it a title, and this is what appears on the page as the title itself. So if we come back into our plugin, this right here is the title. So notice in our code, we don't have to put any header elements. WordPress is automatically going to do that, and that is one of the great things we will see about the Settings API is it will generate some things for us. Now, to put in the description, we have to do that a little bit differently, and we register a callback function, which is a pattern we've seen before where basically rather than echo out HTML directly here, we write a function that echoes out the HTML. So that's exactly what we're doing. Down here, we're basically just putting in our description. And via this callback function, it is going to show up right there. So this is how we get the optional description that you could put, or we could just leave this blank and nothing will happen. Finally, we have to say what page we're on. And how do we know what page we're on? That is because when we set up our menu, we specify what slug we want. And we could also see that in our plugin up here. And so the last parameter is to tell a section what page it should go on. Now, just to show you, I can change it to something like general. And if I come into my settings now, I should see my custom plugin settings here. And that's just to give you a sneak peek that it can, you can have your stuff show up in other areas. But we want to focus now on having it show up in our own plugin page. Okay, so at a very basic, that is what settings section is. It's all it does. It just sets up a section, but later on when we add fields, we have to add them to a specific section, so that's why we need this to exist. So at this point, I would suggest go ahead and open up this practice file, change some of these parameters, try to make sure it still works, change the description, change the title, and then try duplicating this and adding two sections, and if you really want to, you could play around with trying to figure out how to get it to add to other pages. So get comfortable with adding settings sections because in the next step, we're going to take all this same code and we're going to add in some settings fields. Actually, you know what? We cannot end there. I forgot that we have to go into our templates and look at the actual form that we're using to display everything. So this is very important. Sorry, I didn't mention that earlier. Okay, so this is on our actual page itself. So the settings page, if we go into menus, and we look at the settings page markup callback. We look down here, we are including this file templates admin settings.php, and that's a method I showed you before, how you could break out some of your settings pages into their own templates, and you could probably see that this is a lot cleaner to read than reading it in that other file over there. Okay, so we pull in the page title, then we use an actual HTML form tag with method post, and the action goes to options.php. Now with settings, this doesn't need to exist yet. We could actually remove this, but we're going to, or I'm sorry, with sections, we don't need this because we're not actually submitting anything yet, but all content will be submitted to the options.php file, and we will be able to process it from there. So next we have settings fields, and remember we set ours up to be WP plugin settings, and we'll actually look in more depth in the next lesson at this one. So I'll skip over what this is doing behind the scenes and just point out the do settings sections. So this is going to take a parameter of what page we are on. It's not going to automatically detect because you could also put setting sections in different places. So we're going to say whatever is registered with WP plugin, put the settings sections here. And this is the code that we actually need even if we have a settings section registered and put on the page, we're still going to need to go into the template itself and make sure that do settings sections is in there. Now we're also putting in a submit button. You could probably comment this out for now, but we will need the submit button later, and notice that this is a WordPress function and not just a normal submit field. Then we close up the form tag, and that's everything. So really the important part to point out is this right here. This is what is going to allow the settings to execute on the front end. Now in this, it's already included, but if you're building your own plugins along, make sure that you grab this code as well. And like I said, we'll explore some more of these in the coming videos. Okay, so make sure you can get setting sections up and running on your own. Maybe try executing 2 of them, and then we'll get into more depth in the next lesson.